Ed O'Neill finally reveals what most fans never figured out about Married, with Children. Ed O'Neill sat in the living room of his home, the golden light of sunset streaming through the window and shining on a brown leather sofa, the same spot where he often sat reading scripts, reminiscing about his years on set. You might think Al Bundy was just a grumpy, funny, washed-up guy, but this time, Ed decided to share something that very few people knew, and something he himself only realized years later. The beginning and the uncertainty. Ed recalled the moment he got the role of Al Bundy, a weary shoe salesman, forever nostalgic about his glory days in the suburbs of Chicago. When Married, with Children premiered in 1987, it immediately broke every rule of the American family sitcom. It didn't shy away from mocking marriage, family, work, lust, and disappointment. Ed once confessed that he thought the show would be cancelled after just a few episodes because we were making fun of everyone, a statement rarely heard in the wholesome world of family sitcoms. And yet, as people laughed at Al Bundy, the loser dad, always scolded by his wife, Ed began to realize something deeper. Beneath the crude jokes and sarcasm was a real sadness, a fatigue, a quiet despair that many people, especially men, have felt but never seen reflected on screen. What most fans never figured out. Here's what almost no fan of Married, with Children ever guessed. Ed O'Neill revealed that Al Bundy wasn't just a miserable, funny character. He was a symbol of failed expectations in life. When I looked at Al, Ed said, I didn't see a cartoonish role. I saw a man who once had his moment. Al was once a high school football hero, a fullback who dreamed big, who was promised everything, until an injury ended it all. I based him on my uncle, Ed recalled, a man who was full of life once, and then, life just passed him by. I put that man inside Al Bundy. So even when Al complained about his wife, hated selling shoes, daydreamed about scoring 4 touchdowns in one game, or read the newspaper with a beer in hand, he stayed. Because countless men and women out there have also lost their game, their dreams, yet they keep showing up. They wake up, go to work, and face life, over and over again. Fans often laughed at Lazy Peggy, Sex-Obsessed Bud, or Beautiful but Ditzy Kelly, but they rarely realized that Al Bundy was living a life he never chose, and he knew it. You could see it in his eyes, his sighs, his silence at the end of the day, polishing his shoes and staring into nothing. Work and growing awareness. As the seasons went on, Ed O'Neill began to notice that audiences laughed at Al Bundy not just because he was funny, but because they saw a little of themselves in him. In one episode, Al and Peggy argue, and for the first and only time, Peggy says, "I'm sorry." But Al refuses to be intimate afterward, not out of anger, but because he still feels something isn't right. Ed realized, this wasn't a joke, it was a portrait of a marriage that had lost its spark, of passion replaced by habit. He later said, we were probably the only sitcom, before or since, that actually said sex and marriage isn't always great. And from that moment, he understood, people weren't just laughing at a dysfunctional family. They were seeing themselves, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, people with dreams, regrets, and responsibilities who keep going despite it all. The man behind the character. In several interviews, Ed O'Neill admitted that although Al Bundy was nothing like him, Ed trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and even earned a black belt, the character gave him something rare, a mirror into humanity. Working with co-stars like Christina Applegate, Kelly Bundy, and Katie Sagal, Peggy Bundy, Ed saw that they weren't just playing an absurd family, they were building something authentic. Something that made audiences say, yeah, that's kind of my family too. Applegate once said that Ed raised her in his own way, not just as a co-star, proof that behind the sarcasm, Ed himself had depth and kindness. And from that, Ed came to a realization. What most fans missed was that beneath the punchlines and outrageous scripts was a man, disappointed, yet devoted. A man who loved his family, but couldn't find the freedom he thought he would. The moment of change. Once, Ed re-watched an old episode and saw Al standing before a mirror, wearing his dull shoe salesman uniform, staring into his own reflection. Ed said he couldn't laugh anymore. There was resignation in his eyes, he said. I saw myself in him, and I saw a lot of other men too. From then on, he treated every gesture, the way Al looked at his beat-up Dodge, the way he sighed before dinner, the way he refused Peggy not out of cruelty but self-loathing, as something more than a joke. Fans remember the laughter and the absurdity, but Ed wanted them to remember this. Al Bundy was not a clown. He was a mirror of modern disappointment. Legacy and message. When the show ended in 1997, after 11 seasons and 259 episodes, Ed didn't see it as a farewell, but as a milestone. Because through Al Bundy, and through himself, he had told the world one truth. Life doesn't always end with happily ever after. And that doesn't make you a failure. Ed wanted audiences to pause the next time they laughed at a sitcom and ask, why does this character look tired? Why does he drift off? Why does he cling to the past? Because sometimes, comedy isn't just mockery, it's confession. And his message to viewers was simple. If you've dreamed big and fallen hard, if you've been blamed or felt not good enough, remember, you're not alone. Al Bundy once dreamed, too. He lost, too, but he kept showing up. And that's something worth respecting. Conclusion. While many will always laugh at lines like, I scored 4 touchdowns in a single game, or Al dodging Peggy's affection, Ed O'Neill hopes you'll see what lies beneath. A real man saying, I'm tired too. I'm disappointed too, but I'm still here. And that's what most fans never realized, that Married with Children wasn't just a rude, outrageous sitcom. It was a reflection of real life, full of failures, dreams, and survival. Ed O'Neill didn't just play Al Bundy, he used him to tell us this truth. Look deeper, listen longer. Humor isn't always laughter, sometimes it's the mask we wear to hide our sadness and our hope.